Hello! Welcome to our channel. Today we have an inspiring story full of life lessons to share. If you enjoy meaningful content, leave a like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinion means a lot to us. Let's get started with this touching narrative.
The rain drummed steadily against the windows, casting a somber rhythm over the city and matching Nathan Parker's bleak mood. Outside, his sprawling estate seemed like something out of a fairy tale. Manicured gardens stretched in perfect symmetry, a grand fountain stood proudly at the center of the cobblestone driveway, and the mansion's expansive windows gleamed under the stormy gray sky. Inside, however, the house felt hollow, as though reflecting the emptiness of its owner. Nathan sat in his wheelchair in the library, a grand room lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with books he no longer read. The dark mahogany wood and elegant chandeliers clashed with the desolation in his eyes. He gazed out the window, watching the raindrops slide down the glass, but his thoughts were far away, trapped in memories he couldn't escape. Since the accident that had taken his ability to walk, his days had blended into an endless cycle of bitterness and isolation. Friends and family had drifted away, unable to breach the walls he had built around himself. Across town, Emily Carter adjusted the collar of her worn coat as she stepped off the bus. She was no stranger to challenges, but this job interview felt different, intimidating, even. Ever since losing her mother, Emily had been juggling responsibilities, caring for her younger sister, working long hours as a caregiver, and trying to make ends meet. Despite the odds, she carried herself with quiet determination, her bright green eyes hinting at a resilience few could see. "All right, Emily, you've got this," she murmured to herself as she approached the towering iron gates of the Parker estate. The job was too important to lose. The pay could mean stability for her family, and she couldn't afford to let nerves get in the way. The gates creaked open, and Emily was greeted by Margaret, the stern housekeeper. Margaret, a middle-aged woman with sharp features and a no-nonsense demeanor, led her across the estate while explaining the nature of the role. "Mr. Parker isn't easy to deal with, Miss Carter. He can be difficult. To put it bluntly, most caregivers don't last more than a week. I hope you're prepared." Emily nodded, offering a small smile. "I've worked with all kinds of people, Mrs. Margaret. I'm sure I can handle it." Margaret raised a skeptical eyebrow but said nothing further. When they reached the library door, she knocked twice before opening it. "Mr. Parker, your new caregiver is here." Nathan didn't turn away from the window. His voice was low and clipped, carrying an edge of irritation. "I didn't ask for another caregiver." Emily stepped into the room, her heart pounding but her resolve steady. "Mr. Parker, my name is Emily Carter. I'm here to assist you in any way you need." Nathan finally turned his wheelchair to face her, his piercing blue eyes appraising her silently. He noted her simple attire, the faint nervousness in her posture, and the determined set of her jaw. "Assist me," he said, his voice laced with skepticism. "And what exactly do you think you can do for me, Miss Carter?" Emily met his gaze, refusing to be intimidated. "Whatever it takes, Mr. Parker. My job is to make your life easier." Nathan let out a dry, humorless laugh. "Easier? My life hasn't been easy since I lost this." He gestured toward his immobile legs. "I don't think your presence will change that." The tension in the room was palpable, but Emily stood her ground. She knew she couldn't afford to back down. "Maybe I can't change your situation, but I can make things more manageable. If you'll let me." Nathan narrowed his eyes, his expression unreadable. Before he could respond, Margaret spoke up. "Miss Carter will begin tomorrow, Mr. Parker. Do you need anything else before I show her to her room?" "No," Nathan replied curtly, turning his chair back toward the window. "Just leave me alone." As Emily followed Margaret out of the library, she couldn't shake the heavy atmosphere that lingered in the room. Nathan Parker wasn't just bitter, he was deeply wounded. There was a pain in his eyes that spoke of more than just physical loss. Emily decided then and there that she wouldn't let his resistance deter her. She had a job to do, and she would do it well. That night, Emily settled into the modest room Margaret had prepared for her on the second floor. The house, though grand, felt lifeless. There was no laughter, no warmth, just the eerie silence of empty halls and closed doors. Emily stared out of her window at the rain-soaked gardens below, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Meanwhile, Nathan sat alone in his library, the shadows of the past swirling in his mind. He hated the intrusion of strangers into his carefully guarded world, but something about Emily's unwavering gaze had unsettled him. She didn't look at him with pity or condescension, but with a calm determination that was rare and unexpected. The next morning, Emily began her duties early. She prepared Nathan's breakfast and organized his medication schedule before heading to the library, where she found him in the same spot as the day before, staring out the window. "Good morning, Mr. Parker," she said brightly, placing a tray on the table beside him. "I've brought your coffee and your medications." Nathan didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the rain-drenched landscape. Emily hesitated before speaking again. "You know, I've always thought rain has a way of washing everything clean. Like it's giving the world a fresh start." Nathan finally turned his head, raising an eyebrow at her. "Do you always talk this much?" Emily smiled, undeterred. "Only when I think it's worth it." His eyes narrowed slightly, as though trying to decipher her. "And what makes you think I'm worth talking to?" "Because I believe there's more to you than what you let people see." Nathan didn't reply right away. There was something disarming about her honesty. Most people tiptoed around him, afraid to say the wrong thing. But Emily didn't seem afraid of him, or his bitterness. Finally, he sighed. "If you're here to fix me, Miss Carter, you're wasting your time." "I'm not here to fix anyone, Mr. Parker," Emily replied, her voice soft but firm. "I'm just here to help. And I don't give up easily." Nathan watched as she left the library, a small flicker of something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. For the first time in years, he found himself wondering if letting someone in might not be as unbearable as he thought. The following morning, the rain had eased, leaving the air damp and heavy with the scent of earth. The Parker mansion, drenched in sunlight for the first time in days, seemed less foreboding. But inside, the same quiet tension persisted. Emily rose early, determined to make progress with her new charge, despite his icy reception the day before. Emily prepared Nathan's breakfast with care, eggs cooked to perfection, crisp bacon, and a fresh croissant. She carried the tray to the library, where she knew he would be. Just as she had predicted, he was by the window, his broad shoulders hunched slightly forward as though carrying an invisible weight. "Good morning, Mr. Parker," she said cheerfully, placing the tray on a small table beside him. Nathan didn't glance at her. "You're persistent. I'll give you that." "It's part of the job," Emily replied with a small smile. "I made your breakfast. I hope you're hungry." "I'm not." His tone was curt, but his eyes flickered briefly toward the tray before returning to the window. Emily didn't miss the flicker. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. "Well," she said, pulling up a chair, "I'll just sit here for a bit in case you change your mind." Nathan turned to face her then, his gaze sharp. "You're not paid to sit and stare at me, Miss Carter." "I'm paid to help you," she said, meeting his glare with calm determination. "And sometimes helping means being patient." The silence between them stretched, heavy and fraught. Finally, Nathan sighed and reached for the coffee mug. Emily suppressed a triumphant grin as he took a sip. As the morning wore on, Emily busied herself with household tasks, occasionally crossing paths with Margaret, who offered little more than a polite nod. By midday, Emily found herself back in the library, organizing books on a lower shelf while Nathan remained silent in his usual spot. "What's your story?" His voice broke the quiet, startling her. "My story," she echoed, glancing up. "Yes. Everyone has one. What's yours?" Emily hesitated, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she hadn't expected him to ask. "It's not all that interesting," she said, standing and brushing dust from her hands. "I grew up in a small town. Lost my mom a few years ago. It's just me and my sister now." Nathan's expression didn't soften, but there was a trace of curiosity in his gaze. "And you decided to become a caregiver?" "It's what I'm good at," Emily said simply. "People need someone to look out for them. I like being that person." Nathan leaned back slightly, his tone edged with sarcasm. "A noble cause. Though I imagine dealing with someone like me wasn't quite what you had in mind." Emily studied him for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "You're not the first person I've worked with who's struggling. And you're not the most difficult, either." His lips twitched into what might have been the ghost of a smile. "I find that hard to believe." "It's true," Emily said lightly, sitting down across from him. "But I'd rather hear your story, if you're willing to share." Nathan's face darkened. He turned his chair slightly, as if retreating from the question. "There's nothing to tell." Emily didn't push. She could see the storm brewing beneath his composed exterior, the way his hands clenched the armrests of his wheelchair. Whatever pain he carried, it wasn't ready to surface. The days that followed were marked by a delicate dance. Emily maintained her steady presence, tending to Nathan's needs while carefully navigating his mood swings. Sometimes he ignored her completely, retreating into the fortress of his own mind. Other times, he challenged her with sharp remarks or pointed questions, testing her resolve. It was during one of these moments that a breakthrough occurred. Emily had just finished dusting the library when Nathan spoke. "Do you know why I'm like this?" She turned to him, startled. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion, but his eyes were piercing. "I know there was an accident," she said cautiously, "but I don't know the details." Nathan's jaw tightened. He looked away, staring at the floor. "It was my fault. I was driving too fast. Showing off." His voice cracked, and Emily's chest tightened. "I lost control. The car flipped. She didn't make it." "She?" Emily asked softly. "My fiancé," Nathan said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Samantha. She was everything. And I took her away." Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. She stepped closer, kneeling beside his chair. "I'm so sorry, Nathan." He flinched at her use of his first name but didn't correct her. Instead, he continued, his voice bitter. "And now I'm stuck here. Useless. A reminder of what I did." "You're not useless," Emily said firmly. "You're alive. That means there's still something left for you to do." Nathan shook his head, his expression clouded with disbelief. "You don't understand." "No," Emily admitted. "I don't. But I'm willing to try if you'll let me." Nathan didn't respond, but something in his posture shifted. He didn't shut her out as he usually did. Instead, he seemed to weigh her words, considering their meaning. Later that evening, as Emily prepared to retire for the night, Margaret stopped her in the hallway. "You're doing something right," the housekeeper said quietly. "What do you mean?" "Mr. Parker hasn't opened up about Samantha to anyone. Not since the accident." Emily felt a flicker of hope. She knew the road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but for the first time, she felt she had taken a step in the right direction. As she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she couldn't help but wonder, could she truly help Nathan find his way back to himself? Could she bridge the chasm that pain and guilt had carved into his heart? One thing was certain, she wouldn't give up. The morning air was crisp, with a faint promise of spring stirring among the estate's towering oak trees. Emily awoke with renewed determination, her mind lingering on Nathan's confession from the day before. She had seen a glimpse of the man beneath the pain, a man capable of love, even if he couldn't yet see it himself. Today, she resolved to coax him further out of his self-imposed isolation, one small step at a time. Emily began the day by preparing Nathan's breakfast and opening the heavy curtains in the dining room to let in the sunlight. When she wheeled the tray into the library, Nathan was, as always, by the window. But this time, he turned toward her as she entered. "Good morning," she said, placing the tray on the small table beside him. "You're persistent, aren't you?" he replied, though his tone lacked the usual edge. "I prefer to call it consistent," Emily quipped, flashing a quick smile. "I noticed you didn't eat much yesterday, so I made something simple, scrambled eggs and toast. It's good. You should try it." Nathan raised an eyebrow but didn't protest as she set the plate in front of him. To her surprise, he picked up a fork and took a small bite. "Well?" she asked, folding her arms as she watched him. "It's fine," he said, avoiding her gaze. "High praise," she teased, and to her astonishment, his lips twitched as if suppressing a smile. Later that day, Emily decided to push her luck. After tidying the library and ensuring Nathan's medications were in order, she approached him with a suggestion. "It's a beautiful day outside. Why don't we take a walk in the garden?" Nathan's expression hardened immediately. "I don't need you parading me around like some invalid." "That's not what I meant," Emily said gently. "The fresh air might do you good. And the gardens are stunning. You've put so much effort into them. Don't you think it's time you enjoyed them?" "I didn't put effort into anything," Nathan muttered. "The gardeners take care of it." "Then let's see what they've done," Emily pressed. "Just 15 minutes. If you hate it, we can come right back." Nathan stared at her for a long moment, his jaw tight. Finally, he let out a resigned sigh. Fine. 15 minutes. Emily suppressed a grin as she fetched his coat. Deal. The two made their way out of the mansion and onto the cobblestone path that wound through the expansive gardens. Emily pushed Nathan's wheelchair slowly, giving him time to take in the vibrant array of flowers and neatly trimmed hedges. For the first few minutes, Nathan was silent, his expression unreadable. But as they passed a small fountain surrounded by blooming tulips, something in his posture softened. I forgot how quiet it is out here, he murmured. It's peaceful, Emily agreed. And beautiful. You're lucky to have all this. Nathan glanced at her, a hint of skepticism in his eyes. Lucky? Is that what you'd call it? Yes, Emily said firmly. You may not see it now, but you still have so much. Not everyone gets a second chance to find meaning in their life. Nathan didn't respond, but his gaze lingered on the fountain as the water shimmered in the sunlight. Emily decided not to push further. Sometimes, silence could say more than words. As they circled back toward the mansion, they passed a gardener tending to a bed of roses. The elderly man straightened and tipped his hat to Nathan. Good to see you outside, Mr. Parker. It's been a while. Nathan nodded stiffly, but there was a flicker of something, pride, in his expression. Emily noticed it and stored the moment away as another small victory. When they returned inside, Nathan surprised her by saying, "That wasn't terrible." "I'll take that as a glowing endorsement," Emily replied with a grin. That evening, as Emily was organizing Nathan's books, she noticed an old leather-bound journal tucked behind a row of novels. She hesitated before pulling it out. "Is this yours?" she asked, holding it up. Nathan glanced at the journal, his eyes darkening. It was Samantha's. Emily's heart clenched. "I didn't mean to pry," she said quickly, moving to put it back. "No, it's fine," Nathan said, his voice quieter now. She loved to write. Poems, mostly. I haven't looked at it since. His words trailed off, but Emily could hear the weight of them. Carefully, she placed the journal on the table beside him. "She sounds like she was amazing." "She was," Nathan said, his voice almost a whisper. "She had this way of seeing the world, always looking for beauty in the smallest things. I used to think it was naive, but now I wonder if she was right." Emily hesitated before speaking. "You know, maybe that's something you can hold on to. Her way of seeing the world. It doesn't have to end just because she's gone." Nathan looked at her, his expression unreadable. For a moment, she thought he might dismiss her words, but instead, he nodded. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes. As Emily prepared for bed that night, she couldn't help but feel a growing sense of hope. Nathan had ventured outside. He had opened up, just a little, about Samantha. The barriers around him were still formidable, but cracks were beginning to form. She lay awake, thinking about the moments they had shared. Every step forward felt like a triumph, and though she knew there would be setbacks, she was determined to keep moving forward. For Nathan. And for herself. The day began quietly, the stillness of the Parker estate broken only by the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Emily had grown used to the silence, though she couldn't deny the unease it brought. This house was like its owner, proud and beautiful on the outside but heavy with unseen burdens within. Today, she felt it even more acutely as she carried Nathan's breakfast tray to the library. Nathan was seated by the window, as always, but something about his posture seemed different. His shoulders were stiff, his hands clenched tightly around the armrests of his wheelchair. Emily hesitated before speaking, her instincts warning her that today would be difficult. "Good morning, Mr. Parker," she said, her voice light, carefully neutral. "I've brought your breakfast." Nathan didn't respond. His eyes were locked on the view outside, where the sprawling garden basked in the gentle morning light. For a moment, Emily considered leaving the tray on the table and slipping away, but she knew better. Silence, in Nathan's world, was rarely a good sign. She stepped closer. "Is everything all right?" Finally, he turned his head, and she was startled by the intensity in his gaze. There was a storm there, barely contained, and it set her on edge. "All right," he repeated, his voice low and sharp. "Do you really think anything about this is all right, Miss Carter?" Emily held his gaze, her expression calm but questioning. "What's on your mind?" Nathan laughed bitterly, the sound cutting through the room. "What's on my mind? What's always on my mind, Emily? The same thing, day in and day out. The life I lost. The person I killed. The prison I'm trapped in now. Emily felt the air grow heavy between them. "Nathan," she said gently, "I know it's hard. But you know nothing," he snapped, his voice rising. His hands slammed against the armrests, and the sudden sound made her flinch. "You come here every day with your bright smiles and your cheerful little comments, acting like you understand. But you don't. You couldn't possibly understand what it's like to wake up every morning knowing this is all there is. This chair, this house, this emptiness." Emily's breath caught, the sting of his words sharp and deliberate. But she refused to let him see the hurt on her face. Instead, she took a step closer, her voice steady. "You're right. I don't know what it's like to be in your position, but I do know what it's like to lose someone you love. To carry the weight of guilt and wonder if you could have done something differently. You're not the only one who's suffered, Nathan." His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. "Don't compare your life to mine, Emily. It's not the same." "No, it's not," she said, her tone firm but softening. "But that doesn't mean you're alone in this." Nathan turned his chair abruptly, wheeling himself away from the window. "Just leave me alone. I didn't ask for your pity." "It's not pity," Emily said, her voice rising slightly. "It's compassion. And if you keep shutting people out, you're never going to feel anything else." Nathan paused, his back to her, and for a moment she thought he might respond. But instead, he wheeled himself out of the library, leaving her standing there with the untouched breakfast tray and a sinking feeling in her chest. The rest of the day passed in uneasy silence. Emily busied herself with household tasks, her mind replaying the conversation over and over. She knew Nathan's anger wasn't truly directed at her, it was aimed at himself, at the life he believed he had ruined. But knowing that didn't make it any easier to bear. By evening, Emily found herself standing at the edge of the garden, the cool breeze brushing against her face. She had come out here to clear her head, to let the tension of the day dissipate. The garden, so meticulously maintained, seemed like another world entirely, a stark contrast to the heaviness of the house. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of wheels on cobblestone. Turning, she saw Nathan approaching, his wheelchair moving slowly along the path. She straightened, unsure if she should say anything. But before she could decide, he spoke. "I didn't mean what I said earlier," he said quietly, his voice almost swallowed by the wind. Emily hesitated, then stepped closer. "I know." Nathan stopped near the fountain, his gaze fixed on the water as it trickled over the stone edges. "It's just, sometimes it's too much. Everything. And I don't know how to handle it." "You don't have to handle it alone," Emily said, sitting on the edge of the fountain beside him. "No one should." Nathan was silent for a long time, his expression distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw. "Do you know why I always sit by the window? It's because it's the only place I feel like I'm part of the world. Out there, people are living their lives. They're moving forward. And I'm just stuck." "You're not stuck," Emily said gently. "You're healing. And that takes time." He let out a shaky breath, his hands clenching the arms of his chair. "I don't even know if I want to heal. Because if I do, then I have to let go of her. And I don't think I can." Emily's heart ached for him. She reached out, placing her hand lightly over his. "Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean you stop loving her. It just means making room for something new. For someone new. And she'd want that for you, Nathan. I'm sure of it." Nathan's eyes met hers, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of vulnerability in his gaze. It was as if the walls he had built around himself were beginning to crumble, piece by fragile piece. "I don't know how to do that," he admitted. "You don't have to figure it out all at once," Emily said softly. "Just one step at a time." Nathan didn't respond, but his silence wasn't the cold, dismissive kind she had grown used to. It was thoughtful, almost hopeful. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the garden in a warm golden glow, Emily felt a glimmer of hope herself. For the first time, it seemed as though Nathan was ready, not to move on, but to move forward. And she would be there, every step of the way, no matter how difficult the journey might be. The next morning arrived with a soft mist blanketing the Parker estate. The dew on the roses glistened like scattered diamonds, and the gentle hush of the world seemed to echo the tentative peace that had formed between Nathan and Emily the evening before. Emily felt it as she made her way downstairs, a sense that something fragile but promising was beginning to take root. Nathan was in the dining room when she arrived, an unusual departure from his usual spot by the library window. He was seated at the large mahogany table, staring at a steaming cup of coffee as though lost in its swirls. Emily hesitated in the doorway, unsure whether to disturb him, but he glanced up and noticed her. "Good morning," he said, his tone softer than she'd ever heard it. "Good morning," Emily replied, a flicker of surprise lighting her features. "You're up early." Nathan gave a small shrug, his hands curling around the mug. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd try something different." Emily stepped into the room, setting a fresh plate of toast and eggs before him. "Different is good," she said lightly. "It suits you." Nathan chuckled, the sound faint but genuine. "Let's not get carried away." Emily took the seat opposite him, watching as he took a bite of his breakfast without hesitation. For once, there was no battle of wills, no resistance cloaked in sarcasm. Instead, they sat in companionable silence, the air between them free of tension. As she sipped her own coffee, Nathan broke the quiet. "You said something yesterday. About moving forward, making room for something new." Emily set her cup down carefully. "I did." Nathan's gaze was steady, though his voice faltered slightly. "What if I don't deserve that? What if the only thing waiting for me out there is more pain?" Emily leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Nathan, pain is a part of life. But so is joy. So is love. Staying in this place, physically and emotionally, it won't protect you from the pain. It'll only keep you from everything else." Nathan looked away, his jaw tightening. "It's not that simple." "I know it's not," Emily said gently. "But you don't have to figure it all out at once. Small steps, remember." He nodded slowly, his fingers drumming against the table. "You're annoyingly persistent, you know that?" "I've been told," Emily replied with a grin. For the first time, Nathan smiled, an actual smile that reached his eyes. It was fleeting, but Emily saw it and felt her heart swell. Later that day, Emily suggested another walk in the garden. Nathan hesitated but eventually agreed, and together they ventured out into the misty grounds. This time, their pace was unhurried, their conversation light and interspersed with stretches of silence that felt comfortable rather than strained. When they reached the fountain, Nathan stopped and turned his chair to face Emily. "There's something I want to show you." Emily tilted her head, intrigued. "What is it?" Nathan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gestured for her to follow him as he wheeled his chair down a path she hadn't noticed before. It wound through a cluster of tall oaks, the dense foliage overhead casting dappled shadows on the ground. At the end of the path stood a small, weathered gazebo. It was simple yet elegant, its white paint chipped in places, but the charm of it was undeniable. Inside, a single wooden bench faced an overgrown wildflower garden. "This was Samantha's favorite spot," Nathan said quietly as they entered. "She used to sit here for hours, sketching or writing. She said it was the one place where the world felt peaceful." Emily sat on the bench, taking in the view. The wildflowers swayed gently in the breeze, their colors vibrant even under the muted gray sky. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Nathan nodded, his eyes distant. "I haven't been back here since the accident." Emily glanced at him, understanding the weight of the moment. "What made you decide to come now?" Nathan hesitated, his fingers gripping the wheels of his chair. You reminded me that it's okay to look back without being trapped by it." Emily felt a lump rise in her throat. "I'm glad you brought me here." They sat in silence for a while, the quiet punctuated only by the rustling leaves and the occasional chirp of a bird. It was a rare, unguarded moment for Nathan, and Emily knew better than to disrupt it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and pink, they made their way back to the house. Nathan seemed lighter somehow, as though the weight he carried had shifted just enough for him to breathe more freely. That evening, Emily found him in the library, staring at Samantha's leather-bound journal. She hovered in the doorway, unsure whether to interrupt. But before she could decide, Nathan spoke. "I think I'm ready," he said, his voice barely audible. Emily stepped closer. "Ready for what?" "To let her go," he said, looking up at her with eyes that glistened with unshed tears. "Not to forget her, but to stop letting the guilt control me. I don't know how to do it, but I want to try." Emily felt a surge of pride and compassion. "That's a big step, Nathan. And it's okay if it takes time. You don't have to do it alone." Nathan nodded, his gaze steady. "Thank you, Emily, for not giving up on me." Her smile was warm and genuine. "That's not something I know how to do." For the first time, Nathan felt a flicker of hope, real, tangible hope, that his life could be more than a series of painful memories. It was a fragile thing, but he held on to it, knowing it was the beginning of something new. The grand hall of the community center buzzed with life. Laughter echoed against the high ceilings, mingling with the sound of clinking glasses and the soft strains of piano music. Dozens of people moved through the room, their conversations weaving a tapestry of joy and connection. In the center of it all stood Nathan Parker, his wheelchair beside Emily Carter as they welcomed guests to the inaugural gala for the Parker Foundation for Hope and Healing. Months had passed since that fateful morning when Nathan had decided to let go of his guilt and start anew. The road had not been easy. There had been setbacks, moments of doubt, and days when the shadows of the past threatened to pull him under. But through it all, Emily had been there, steady and unyielding, a constant light in his darkest moments. Nathan glanced at Emily now, her smile radiant as she spoke to a group of supporters. She wore a simple but elegant dress that brought out the sparkle in her eyes, and Nathan couldn't help but feel a swell of gratitude. She had changed his life in ways he never thought possible, showing him that love wasn't about perfection but about acceptance and growth. "Ready for your speech?" Emily asked, turning to him with a teasing grin. Nathan laughed softly, the sound filled with warmth. "As ready as I'll ever be." The room quieted as Nathan wheeled himself to the small stage at the front of the hall. Emily stayed behind, her heart pounding with pride as she watched him. Nathan adjusted the microphone and took a deep breath, his hands steady on the podium. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice firm and clear. "Thank you for being here tonight. This event marks the beginning of something that not long ago, I never imagined would be possible." He paused, his eyes scanning the room. "For a long time, I was lost. I let my pain and guilt define me, shutting out the world and convincing myself that there was nothing left for me to give. But someone came into my life and refused to let me believe that. She reminded me that even in our darkest moments, there is still light. That even when we feel broken, we are still whole in ways that matter most." Nathan's gaze found Emily, and his voice softened. "Emily Carter taught me that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means honoring the past while making space for the future. And tonight, as we launch the Parker Foundation for Hope and Healing, I hope to share that lesson with others. This foundation is for everyone who feels like they've lost their way, for those who need a reminder that they are not alone, and for the caregivers who stand by them, unwavering, through every step of the journey." The audience erupted into applause, many dabbing at their eyes as Nathan finished his speech. Emily felt tears sting her own eyes as she watched him descend from the stage, his smile brighter than she had ever seen. As the evening drew to a close, Nathan and Emily stood together near the entrance, thanking guests as they departed. When the last of the attendees had gone, Nathan turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "You know," he said, "I wouldn't have made it here without you." Emily smiled, her heart full. "You made it because you wanted to. I just reminded you that you could." Nathan reached for her hand, his grip firm and warm. "And I'll never stop being grateful for that." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of everything they had been through settling into a quiet understanding. The night was still, the stars shining brightly above them as they stepped outside. For the first time, Nathan felt truly free, not from his past, but from the chains he had placed on himself. With Emily by his side, he knew he could face whatever the future held. Together, they had built something beautiful, not just for themselves but for everyone who needed a reminder of the power of love and resilience. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey of love, resilience, and redemption. Nathan and Emily's story reminds us that true healing comes from accepting ourselves and allowing others into our lives, no matter how broken we may feel. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What was your favorite moment in Nathan and Emily's journey? Share your insights in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who might need a little inspiration, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories like this one. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to bring you more heartfelt tales. Thank you for being a part of our community. See you in the next story.